A quiet afternoon turns strange when he briefly leaves, and an unexpected knock reveals an elderly woman holding an envelope of money. It had been one of those serene days that start with gentle sunlight crawling across the living room floor, warming the cool tiles and casting soft, stretched shadows that moved with every passing minute. I had been sitting by the window enjoying the subtle hum of life outside, the distant rumbling of motorcycles, children laughing somewhere down the street, occasional birds landing on the electric wires. Everything felt still, normal, predictable. There was not a single sign that the day would slip into something unforgettable. He had stepped out for only a moment, just to fetch something from outside, and I remember glancing at him as he moved through the doorway. Nothing unusual, no sign, no hint, just an ordinary exit on an ordinary afternoon. I didn't even get up from my seat. Why would I? I had no reason to expect that a single knock would change the air in the room. The knock came softly at first. A gentle, hesitant tapping as though the person behind the door feared imposing. I assumed it might be a neighbor, a delivery, or even a child selling something, but something about the knock made me pause. It carried uncertainty, a kind of fragile patience, almost like the knocker was debating whether to knock again or turn back. I rose, smoothing my shirt out of habit, and walked toward the door. I didn't feel alarmed, just curious. When I opened it, the sunlight from outside fell across the doorway and illuminated the figure standing there, an elderly woman hunched slightly, wrapped in a dull beige shawl whose edges had frayed from years of use. Her skin was lined with time, and her silver hair peeked out from a faded scarf tied loosely around her head. She looked up at me with eyes that held a strange mixture of resolve and hesitation. In her hands wrinkled and trembling, she held a small, slightly torn envelope. The edges were softened, as if it had been handled too many times to count. "Are you the lady of this house?" she asked, her voice thin but steady. I nodded slowly, unsure what to make of her sudden presence. She exhaled, relieved, as though she had rehearsed this moment many times and feared she'd reached the wrong door. Without waiting for an invitation, she extended the envelope toward me. "This is for you." I stared at it, then at her. The envelope felt heavier than its size should allow, even before it touched my fingers. Her hands shook slightly as she held it out, but her expression remained earnest, almost pleading. "I think you may be mistaken," I said gently. "I don't know you." Her lips curved into the faintest, saddest smile. "No, you don't, but I know you." A shiver ran down my spine, not from fear but from the sheer unexpectedness of her words. Before I could respond, she gestured weakly toward the inside of the house. "May I come in for a moment?" she asked. I hesitated. Everything about her seemed frail, harmless, sincere. There was no threat in her demeanor, only a need, perhaps to speak, to confess, or to return something she believed was owed. After a moment of internal debate, I stepped aside to let her in. She moved slowly into the living room, pausing to take in the space as if uncertain where to stand or sit. I motioned to the couch, and she lowered herself carefully, adjusting her shawl with deliberate movements. The envelope rested in her lap, and her eyes followed my every gesture. I sat across from her, still unsure how to begin. She seemed equally unsure, though she had come with purpose. After a long silence, she finally spoke. "Years ago," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "someone changed the course of my life without even knowing it. And I have waited a long time to return what I owe." I blinked, unable to hide my confusion. "Someone like me?" "Yes," she answered softly. "You..." I felt my heart stutter. "I don't understand." Her gaze softened, almost tender. "You wouldn't remember. People rarely remember the small acts of kindness they show others. But those who receive them, they never forget." She took a deep breath, steadying herself, as though preparing to open a memory she had kept sealed for years. "It was raining that night," she said. "Cold, heavy rain. I had slipped crossing the street in front of the old bakery. I fell hard and no one stopped. People kept walking, cars kept moving, and I felt invisible. But you rushed over, you pulled me up, shook the rain out of my scarf, and half dragged me inside the bakery." I searched my memory, the image of that bakery blinking faintly at the edge of recall. I remembered its warm yellow lights, its old wooden benches, the smell of fresh bread. But did I remember her? A wet, trembling woman on a rainy night? My mind struggled to connect the threads. "You bought me tea," she continued. "Hot, sweet tea. You told me I looked unwell and insisted I go to the clinic instead of walking home alone. I didn't want to burden you, but you didn't listen. You walked with me to the clinic yourself." Bits of memory flickered, an umbrella, a stranger, a night soaked in rain. But everything felt blurry, distant, incomplete. The years had swallowed the details, but not for her. "That night," she said, her voice cracking, "I had nothing. No money, no hope, no reason to continue." She swallowed, fighting emotion. "I was on the edge of giving up, completely. But you sat with me until I was treated. You hugged me before leaving. You told me, 'Don't disappear. The world is still waiting for you.'" A chill swept through me. Those words, I did say them. Suddenly the memory wasn't blurry. It sharpened like a photo brought into focus. I remembered her face, not clearly but enough. The sadness in her eyes, the shaking in her hands, the way she clung to the cup of tea as though it were the last warmth she might ever hold. "I didn't think much of it," I whispered. "I was just trying to help. But it saved me," she replied firmly. "You saved me." Her voice was quiet, but filled with the kind of certainty that comes from deep, lived experience. "I rebuilt my life after that night," she said. "It was hard. It took years. But I found my footing again." I worked small jobs, then bigger ones. I survived, then lived, then began to feel grateful for waking up each day. She paused, her breathing heavy. "And every time life gave me something, no matter how small, I promised myself I would return the kindness to the one who gave me the strength to keep living." She ran her fingers along the edges of the envelope. "I've saved this little by little, for years. It isn't much by the world's standards, but it is everything I could give." I stared at the envelope, unsure what to say. Accepting money for something I barely remembered felt wrong. It felt heavy, undeserved. She sensed my hesitance before I even voiced it. "Please," she urged softly, "let me do this. It's not a payment, it's gratitude. A piece of my life returning to where it began again." Her words settled over me like a warm blanket. I looked into her eyes and saw sincerity, depth, and years of emotion wrapped in gratitude. She slowly held up the envelope again. Her hand trembled, not from weakness but from the weight of the moment. "Take it," she whispered. "Please." I reached out, hesitating only for a second before my fingers closed around the envelope. It felt even heavier than before, filled not just with money but with her history, her survival, her journey. For a long moment we simply sat there, silent yet deeply connected. After a while she began to tell her story in fragments, how she had worked at a small stitching workshop, how she lost her husband long before that rainy night, how her only child had left the country and never returned, leaving her alone, how she had fallen into despair, unable to find meaning in anything, how the kindness of a stranger had lit a tiny spark again. "The world forgets the lonely ones," she murmured. "But you didn't forget me that night." Her eyes glistened with tears she didn't shed. There was strength in her restraint. She spoke of the little sewing jobs she took at home, how she slowly built a circle of clients, how she refused to spend a portion of the money she earned because she knew it belonged to someone who once gave her warmth when she had none. "My life changed because a stranger cared," she said. "I wanted to make sure the circle did not break." She paused often, resting her hands on her knees, catching her breath. Age had made her slow, but her mind was sharp. Her memory was a polished stone she had carried for decades. We talked for what felt like hours, though time moved softly, slipping unnoticed between our words. I found myself not just listening but feeling her story, her loneliness, her struggles, her tiny victories, her long journey back to life. At one point she looked around the living room, her eyes falling on a small framed picture on the shelf, a photo from a family gathering. She smiled wistfully. "You have warmth in this house," she said, "a kind of warmth many people never find. Maybe that is why your heart had space for me that night." Her compliment made my chest tighten, not with pride but with humility. I wondered how many other lives crossed ours without us realizing their significance. How many moments we forget become the turning points of someone else's story. After a long pause, she stood slowly, gripping the side of the couch for support. I rose to help her, and she placed a gentle hand on my arm. "You gave me strength," she said softly. "Today I wanted to give you something in return." She adjusted her shawl and walked toward the door with small, deliberate steps. I followed her, still trying to process everything she had shared. At the doorway, she turned back one last time. Her eyes were filled with a quiet wisdom forged from hardship and survival. "Kindness doesn't disappear," she said. "It travels. Even when we forget it, it remembers us." She stepped outside, her figure framed against the afternoon sunlight. For a moment, she looked almost ethereal, fragile yet powerful, like a living memory. I watched her walk away slowly down the street, her steps steady despite her age. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She had said everything she came to say. When she disappeared around the corner, I finally looked down at the envelope still in my hand. I had avoided opening it earlier out of respect, but now curiosity tugged at me. My fingers gently peeled back the worn flap. Inside was a stack of bills, carefully arranged, folded perfectly, and held together with a small ribbon. But beneath the money lay something more, a handwritten letter on yellowed paper. The ink had faded, but the words were still legible. I unfolded it carefully. "Some debts are not paid with money," the letter began. "They are paid with life. This is only a symbol of what you gave me. Thank you for reminding me that the world still had a place for me." I felt tears prick my eyes as I read. The letter went on to describe the years after our encounter, the struggles she faced, the tiny joys she discovered, the slow way she built a life she once believed she would never see. Every line was soaked in emotion, gratitude, and the kind of sincerity that reaches into a person's soul. She hadn't just handed me money. She had handed me a story, a life reborn from a moment I had almost forgotten, a moment so small to me, yet immense to her. I sat back on the couch, the letter resting in my lap, the envelope still warm from her hands. I let the silence of the room wrap around me, broken only by the faint ticking of the wall clock. The house felt different now, quieter but filled with an invisible presence, as though her gratitude still lingered in the air, soft and profound. I looked around, taking in the familiar space with fresh eyes. Nothing had changed, yet everything felt transformed. The room was the same, the light the same, the furniture the same. But inside me, something had shifted. A quiet afternoon had turned into a story I would carry for years, a reminder that lives intersect in unexpected ways, that kindness, no matter how small, leaves echoes. That sometimes the past knocks on our door with trembling hands and a worn envelope, and reminds us that even forgotten moments have a heartbeat that continues far beyond our sight. And as the light from the window stretched across the floor, reaching slowly toward the door where she had stood, I understood, perhaps for the first time in a long while, just how far a single act of compassion can travel. The old woman insists the money belongs to the narrator, claiming it's repayment for something that happened years ago, something the narrator doesn't remember. Her voice trembled as she said it, but her eyes held an unwavering certainty that shook me more than the envelope she clutched in her wrinkled hands. It was late afternoon, the type of quiet hour when the world seems to settle into a soft pause. The sunlight filtered through the curtains in pale strips, casting faint shadows across the floor. I had been rearranging a small stack of books on the coffee table, lost in the hum of ordinary life, when she appeared. I hadn't heard her footsteps approaching the door, nor the faint rustle of her shawl against her clothes. The knock had startled me, gentle yet urgent, like someone tapping with hesitation but the necessity to be heard. When I opened the door, I expected a neighbor, maybe a child selling something, or perhaps a delivery. But instead, an elderly woman stood there, fragile yet oddly composed, her shawl wrapped tightly around her thin shoulders. Her gaze locked on mine immediately, as though she had been waiting for this moment for years. Before I could speak, she lifted the small envelope between us, her fingers trembling with age but firmly curled around its edges. "This is yours," she said. "I've brought it back to you." I stared at it, yellowed with time, its corners soft and almost fragile. Something about it felt personal, but also foreign, a strange mix, like seeing your own handwriting but not recognizing the words. My instinct was to shake my head and insist she had the wrong person, but something in her expression stopped me. "Please," she said softly, "you must take it. I think you're mistaken," I finally managed. "I don't know you, and I've never seen that envelope before." She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, but there was nothing rude in the gesture. It was as if she feared that if she didn't move quickly, her courage might crumble, and she'd lose the chance she had carried for far too long. I closed the door gently behind her and watched as she lowered herself onto the couch with the care of someone who had lived through more winters than anyone should. The envelope remained in her lap. "You don't remember me," she said, "and I don't expect you to. But I remember you." She traced the edge of the envelope with a slow stroke, almost lovingly. It was clear that whatever was inside meant more than just currency. "Years ago," she began, her voice dipping into a well of memories that seemed to echo in the quiet room, "something happened. Something you did for me. Something that saved me." I opened my mouth to speak, to ask for details, but she lifted her hand slowly, signaling that she wasn't finished. "You won't remember," she said again, this time with a faint smile. "Or maybe you forgot because it was small for you. But for me, it was everything." Her words wrapped around me with a haunting familiarity, even as I struggled to grasp any connection. Her eyes held a deep, quiet sadness, not the kind born from tragedy, but the kind that grows from years of carrying a story alone. "It was winter," she said, settling more comfortably into the couch. "A harsh winter, the kind that gets into your bones and refuses to leave. I was wandering through the market that evening, exhausted, hungry, and nearly frozen. I had no money, no warm coat, nothing to protect me from the cold. Memory pricked at me, vague and blurry. A winter evening, a market, a lonely figure by a closed fruit stall. Could it be the same? The recollection flickered in my mind like an old photograph with faded edges, but I couldn't be sure. "You were in the market buying vegetables," she continued, her voice steady now, as though the story had found its own momentum. "I had asked someone else for a few coins, just enough to buy bread. They ignored me. Others did too. People see hunger every day, and after a while it blends into the background." Her eyes shimmered and she blinked slowly. "But you didn't walk past me, you stopped." A chill swept through me, not because of the memory, but because of the certainty in her tone. I still couldn't fully recall the event she described, but something inside me stirred, like the faint tug of a forgotten kindness returning after years of silence. "You took out a scarf from your bag," she said. "A thick one, blue, beautiful. You wrapped it around my neck before I could protest, and then you handed me money, enough for food, enough for medicine, enough to survive." Blue. The scarf. The memory sharpened slightly, like someone had adjusted a blurry picture. I remembered buying that scarf as a gift for someone. I remembered not giving it to them for reasons I no longer recalled. I remembered carrying it in my bag for days. And then, what? Giving it away to a stranger with trembling hands? It felt possible. She exhaled shakily. "You told me to take care of myself. You told me the world hadn't forgotten me, even if it felt like it had." Her voice cracked, and she clutched the envelope tighter. It wasn't dramatic, just quiet, controlled grief, the kind that had been folded and refolded inside her for years. "I used the money to buy medicine," she said. "I was sick that night, very sick, and if I hadn't gotten treatment, I don't think I would have survived. But because of you, I did." She paused, a tear slipping silently down her cheek. "And when I did survive," she continued, "I made myself a promise. I promised that when I got back on my feet, I would return what you gave me, not because you asked, not because you needed it, but because I needed to honor the moment that saved my life." She opened the envelope slowly, revealing neatly arranged bills. Much more than anything I could have possibly given her that day. The money had clearly been saved with care, added to little by little, the way someone saves scraps of hope in a jar. "I earned this," she said proudly. "Every coin, every bill, piece by piece. Years of work, years of rebuilding, years of waiting for the right moment to return it to the person who deserved it." My throat tightened. I still couldn't fully grasp the memory she described, but the sincerity in her voice was undeniable. She wasn't confused. She wasn't mistaken. She was certain. "I don't need you to remember me," she whispered. "I only need you to accept what is yours." "But I never asked you for anything," I said quietly, unable to keep the emotion out of my voice. "And that," she replied, "is exactly why you deserve it." Her words struck deep, disarming me in a way I hadn't expected. She gently pushed the envelope toward me. I stared at it, torn between disbelief and an inexplicable surge of emotion. It felt too heavy, not because of the money itself, but because of everything she claimed it represented. "What you gave me wasn't money," she said softly. "It was a chance to keep living, and I've carried that with me every day since." She wiped her cheek with the corner of her shawl. "You don't remember the scarf, do you?" she asked suddenly. "I might," I admitted slowly. "It's faint, like something I saw in a dream." She nodded, not disappointed but simply understanding. Memories fade for the giver, never for the receiver. She sat silently for a moment, the weight of time settling around her like dust on old furniture. She looked around the room as if trying to imprint it in her mind, to remember the place where she finally fulfilled the promise she had lived with for so long. "I should go soon," she said quietly. "I've wanted this moment for years. I don't want to overstay it." "You're not intruding," I said quickly. "If anything, I just need a moment to understand all of this." "There is nothing to understand," she replied gently. "You were kind. I survived. That is the whole story." But it didn't feel like the whole story. Not to me. For her it was everything, a single moment that changed the trajectory of her life. But for me, it was a moment buried beneath countless other days, forgotten because it wasn't meant to be remembered. And yet it had shaped someone else's entire existence. I sat beside her, feeling the weight of her words settle into the hollow spaces of my memory. "Tell me what happened after," I said softly. "After that night." She looked at me with surprise, as if she hadn't expected me to want the details. But then she smiled gently and began. She told me how she used the money to buy antibiotics, how she slept for days afterward fighting the fever, how she returned to the market weeks later, not to beg, but to work. She found small jobs, cleaning, sewing, cooking when needed. She saved everything she could. She rented a tiny room above a bakery. She survived winter after winter, rebuilding pieces of her life like a mosaic made of broken glass. She had no family left, no one to lean on. But she found strength where she had once felt only emptiness. She made friends, acquaintances, and eventually built a fragile but solid independence. Every day she saved a little, each day thinking of the stranger with the blue scarf who told her the world still cared. She had spent years searching for me, she explained, asking around markets, tracing vague memories, even showing people a sketch she had attempted to draw from memory. The sketch had failed to capture me completely, she admitted, but it had been enough to lead her to someone who recognized the description, someone who pointed her in the direction of this neighborhood. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke, not with fear, but with relief, the kind of relief that comes when a long journey finally ends where it was meant to. "I thought maybe I was too late," she said, "but when you opened the door today, I knew I wasn't." She looked at the envelope again, then at me. "I never kept the scarf," she admitted. "I gave it to another woman years later, a young girl I found crying on a bench during a storm. She was alone, cold, scared. I recognized the look in her eyes, so I wrapped the scarf around her the way you wrapped it around me." My heart tightened. The scarf had traveled farther than I ever imagined. "That's how kindness works," she whispered. "It travels. It doesn't stay with one person. It moves." She smiled, a soft, tired smile worn from years of carrying the weight of gratitude. "And now, this part travels back to you." I opened the envelope finally, my fingers trembling not from its weight but from the immense story behind it. Inside was more money than I had expected. Carefully folded bills, notes that looked kept, not spent carelessly but saved with intention. A note was tucked between the bills. It read, "For the scarf, for the warmth, for the life you saved without knowing." I pressed the note between my fingers, feeling the indentation of her handwriting, feeling the years she had carried this memory like a promise carved into her heart. She stood slowly, leaning on the arm of the couch for support. I moved to help her, but she shook her head gently. "I'm not as fragile as I look," she said with a faint chuckle. She walked toward the door, pausing only once to glance back at me. "You may not remember what you did," she said softly, "but I remember enough for the both of us." She placed her hand on the doorknob and turned it slowly. "And that is why this money belongs to you, not because you gave it, but because you gave me something worth more than money." She opened the door and stepped outside, her silhouette framed by the fading afternoon light. Her shawl fluttered slightly in the breeze. She didn't turn back again. She didn't need to, because in her mind, the circle was complete. I watched her walk down the street, each step steady, purposeful, and full of a peace that only comes when a long-carried burden is finally laid to rest. As not a mysterious connection is revealed, hinting at a forgotten act of kindness that changed the old woman's life. It came to light on a day that had begun with an almost unnatural quiet, the kind of stillness that makes ordinary moments feel suspended, as though the world is holding its breath. I had been alone in the living room, rearranging some cushions on the couch and listening to the distant sound of neighborhood chatter drifting through the window. It was an afternoon that felt predictable, slow, and comforting in its familiarity. That is, until the knock. The sound was soft at first, barely more than a whisper against the wood, gentle, hesitant, almost apologetic. I paused mid-step, unsure if I had imagined it. But then it came again, firmer this time. Someone was definitely at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. There were no deliveries scheduled, no visits planned. That tiny uncertainty pressed at the back of my mind as I walked toward the entrance. When I opened the door, the sunlight spilled in from behind her, outlining her figure in a pale glow. She stood small and frail, wrapped in layers that looked too thin to fight against the world outside. Her shawl was old, its fibers frayed and dulled by time. Her shoes seemed worn through at the tips. But none of that struck me as much as her eyes, deep, tired eyes that shimmered with something between fear and recognition. She clutched an envelope in her wrinkled hands, holding it with a delicacy reserved for something precious. Her knuckles were thin, almost translucent, as though time had eroded everything except her determination. "You don't know me," she said before I could speak, her voice quivering with age and something else, something heavier. "But I've come to return what belongs to you." I blinked, momentarily stunned. Return what? I looked at the envelope, then back at her face, searching for context, for memory, for anything that might explain her sudden appearance. "I'm sorry," I said gently. "You must have the wrong person." She shook her head with a firmness that surprised me, despite her fragile frame. "No," she whispered. "I've been looking for you for years." Her words tugged at something deep inside me, something I couldn't place. Not a memory, but a sensation. The uncanny feeling that life had suddenly opened a door to a chapter I didn't remember writing. "May I come in?" she asked softly. There was no trace of threat in her voice, only a quiet urgency. Without fully understanding why, I stepped aside, allowing her to enter. She moved slowly, almost cautiously, her steps careful on the floor, as though she feared disturbing the silence of the house. She sat on the edge of the couch, her posture rigid, her hands still gripping the envelope. I took a seat across from her and waited, sensing she needed time to gather whatever memory she had carried all this way. After a long moment, she finally exhaled. "You've forgotten," she said softly. "It was many years ago, but the first never did." I felt a chill creep over me, not from cold, but from the weight of her words. There was a story here. I could feel it stretching, reaching across time toward me. "This envelope," she said, lifting it slightly, "is not just money. It is a promise. A promise I made the day you changed my life." I shook my head slowly. "I don't understand. What did I do?" She smiled sadly, as though she expected the question, as though she had known it would come. "You showed kindness," she said. when no one else did. Her voice carried a tremor, but her eyes remained steady, searching my face for a flicker of recollection. When I didn't respond, she continued. It was winter, she said, a bitter winter, the kind where even the air feels sharp. I was on the ground, freezing, unable to stand. People passed me by. People always pass by when someone looks like they have been dropped from life. Her words fell heavy in the room, weaving an image that felt distant yet uncomfortably familiar. I could almost see the scene forming in my mind. A street, a crowd, the rush of people focused only on themselves. And somewhere in the middle, her, alone, unseen. You were younger then, she said, moving quickly, holding a bag of vegetables. You stopped when everyone else kept walking. A faint memory flickered, like a candle in a storm. A cold evening, a fallen figure. My hand reaching out. Or was I imagining it? The image was too blurred to trust. You knelt beside me, she continued. You asked if I was hurt. I told you I was fine, but I wasn't. I was dizzy, hungry, and so tired of life. But you didn't leave me in the cold. You lifted me up. Another memory flickered, a hand reaching for another, shivering, a scarf being wrapped around a stranger's neck, but the details were foggy, slipping through the fingers of my mind like water. You took me to the clinic, she said, her voice softening. You waited while they checked on me. You paid for the medicine without hesitation. And when I told you I had no way to repay you, you said something I have never forgotten. She swallowed, emotion gathering in the back of her throat. You told me, just survive. That will be enough. The sentence struck me like a gust of wind. I felt something click, some tiny piece of memory aligning itself with her story. I didn't remember her face. I didn't remember the moment clearly, but I remembered the words. Those were mine. I remembered saying them. Not vividly, but enough to know she wasn't mistaken. I didn't think it was something significant, I murmured. It was just compassion. She shook her head. It was more than compassion. It was a lifeline. I was sick, truly sick. If you had left me there, I don't think I would have woken up the next morning. My chest tightened. The idea that something I barely remembered could have shaped, or even saved, someone else's life made my pulse race. I promised myself, she said slowly, clutching the envelope tighter, that if I ever found a way to stand on my own 2 feet again, I would return what you gave me. Not the money, but the intention, the chance, the hope. She opened the envelope with trembling fingers and revealed neatly arranged bills, worn from time but carefully kept. This is what I have saved, she explained. Little by little, over years. I do not want it anymore. I want you to have it because it belongs to you. I didn't do it for repayment, I whispered. I know, she said. That's why it matters. The room felt different now, as though the walls themselves were listening. The light through the window had shifted, casting long shadows that stretched across the floor. Time seemed to slow, as though giving space for the gravity of her words to settle. I searched for you, she confessed. For a long time. I only had bits of information. The area you lived in then, the market where we met, a vague description I pieced together from memory. I stared at her, stunned. You went to all that trouble? Yes, she said simply, because the thing you gave me, your kindness, was not small, it was everything. She looked down at her hands as though remembering the past through her fingers. I rebuilt my life after that day, she continued. It took every ounce of strength I had left. I worked menial jobs, cleaned houses, sewed clothes, sold vegetables, whatever I could. I scraped together a life from nothing, and every time I felt the world slipping again, I thought of you. Of the moment, a stranger knelt beside me in the cold and told me that the world still had a place for me. Her voice thickened with emotion, but she pushed through. And that gave me the strength to keep going. You became the reason I survived winters, illnesses, loneliness. You were the spark. Something inside me trembled, not guilt, not pride, something deeper, the realization that compassion, fleeting, forgotten compassion, could plant a seed strong enough to grow a life around. There's something else, she said, lowering her gaze, something I've never told anyone. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto mine. I wasn't supposed to be in that market the day we met. I had planned to end my life that night. That winter had taken everything from me, my strength, my will, my reason to stay. I had nothing left to hold on to. But then, you stopped. And without knowing it, you interrupted the moment I thought would be my last. A wave of cold moved through me, but she wasn't finished. You didn't just give me medicine or warmth. You gave me time. You gave me the chance to choose life again. My breath caught as the weight of her confession sank into me. A forgotten act of kindness, a moment I barely remembered, had changed the trajectory of someone's entire existence. And so, she whispered, I made it my mission to change the lives of others the way you changed mine. I volunteered at shelters. I donated what I could. I helped women who had nowhere to go, who were hungry, broken, lost. I didn't have much, but I shared what little I had. Her eyes glistened again, but this time with pride. And because of that, because of the kindness you sparked, I ended up helping more people than I can count. Some of them survived because I intervened. Some of them are alive today because the spark you gave me became a flame I shared. I covered my mouth, unable to speak. The magnitude of what she revealed was overwhelming. You saved one life, she said softly. And that one life saved many more. The envelope lay between us now, no longer just filled with money but with years of her journey, with a lifetime of gratitude. I am not here because you need this money, she said. I am here because the circle must close. She placed the envelope on the table between us and slid it toward me. Take it, she said, not as repayment, but as remembrance. My hand hovered over the envelope, trembling. She watched me with the quiet devotion of someone who had carried a memory like a talisman through her hardest years. This is part of your story, she said, a part you forgot, a part I will never forget. She stood slowly, her bones creaking slightly with age. She steadied herself with the arm of the couch, her breath coming shallow but controlled. I have finally returned what I owe, she whispered. Now I can rest. She moved toward the door with steps that seemed lighter than before, as though letting go of the envelope had freed her from a burden she had carried across decades. When she reached the doorway, she paused, turning slightly. You changed my life, she said softly, and you didn't even remember doing it. Her smile trembled but held its shape, warm and full of something indescribably profound. And with that, she stepped outside, disappearing into the fading afternoon light, leaving behind an envelope, a story, and a truth I would carry forever. Room felt too still after that moment of suspended tension. The envelope sat between us like a silent witness, absorbing the emotions neither of us could fully express. The old woman's presence had already shifted something inside me, but the weight of what was unspoken, what remained hidden in the cracks between her words, was beginning to grow heavier by the minute. I could see something forming behind her eyes, something she was struggling to reveal but couldn't quite force past her trembling lips. Whatever she had come to give me was not only money. It was a burden she had been carrying for far too long. She shifted slightly on the sofa, the fabric of her shawl rustling like dry leaves. Her fingers trembled as they folded over each other, then unfolded, as though she was trying to warm them with motion alone. Her gaze drifted toward the window where sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, casting soft, fractured light across the room. When I walked here today, she began, her voice barely above a whisper, I felt something I haven't felt in a very long time. Peace, I think. Or maybe relief. It's strange how the body knows before the mind catches up. Her words came slow, winding through the air like smoke curling out of an extinguished candle. I listened, my heartbeat settling into a cautious rhythm. Something inside me sensed that this was the part of the story she had kept hidden, the part that would change everything. She looked at me again, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I didn't just come to return the debt of gratitude, she said. I came to give you something else, something I've held on to with both hands even when it hurt, something I didn't know how to carry anymore. I leaned forward without realizing it, caught between fear and compassion. What is it? Her mouth opened, then closed. She swallowed hard, gathering the courage to speak. Each breath she took seemed heavier than the last. I could feel the gravity of the moment building, drawing us both into a truth I wasn't sure I was prepared to hear. "You saved my life that night," she said, "but I never told you how close I was to losing it." The words hit me with a force that made the room tilt for just a second. I pressed my hands against my knees to steady myself. "I wasn't going home," she continued. "I was planning to disappear. Completely. I was tired, lost, alone. Everything in my life had fallen apart so completely that I didn't think there was a way back. When you helped me, I told myself it was just a moment, a stranger's kindness, nothing more. But something in me shifted, a tiny shift, but enough to keep me walking, enough to keep me breathing." She took a deep breath, as though reliving that long, painful night. "I didn't know it then, but you had planted something inside me, a spark, a reason, and I clung to it." Her voice cracked on the last word, and I felt a sting behind my own eyes. The revelation carved itself into my chest, raw and shocking. I had never imagined that such a small act, an instinctive gesture, could ripple across someone's life with such power. But she wasn't done. "I didn't come just to repay you," she said softly. "I came to release myself from the person I used to be, to lay down what I've been holding, to confess what I never said back then." A chill traveled up my spine. "What didn't you say?" She hesitated, her breath trembling. "That night, you weren't just the person who helped me. You were the reason I turned back, the reason I lived. I've carried that truth like a stone in my chest for years. I needed you to know." Her voice broke entirely then, the dam of emotion cracking wide open. She covered her face with her hands as sobs shook her frail shoulders. The sight pierced through every layer of suspicion, fear, and confusion that had clouded my mind. Suddenly, the envelope didn't matter, the money didn't matter, the years didn't matter. What mattered was that this woman, this stranger with trembling hands and aching memories, had been walking through her life carrying a weight tied to me without my knowledge. Instinctively, I moved closer and placed a hand on her arm. Her skin was cool, thin, delicate. She looked up at me with wet, shimmering eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to bring sorrow into your home. I just didn't know where else to put it." I shook my head slowly. "You didn't bring sorrow. You brought truth." She held my gaze for a long moment, and in that silence, I felt something settle inside me, a clarity I had never expected to find in such a strange encounter. For so long, I had believed kindness was a fleeting thing, something offered in passing, quickly forgotten. But here was living proof that kindness could stretch across time, across memory, across lives, that it could save someone without you ever realizing your role in their story. Yet even as compassion bloomed inside me, tension lingered. The money still rested between us, its presence heavy. I wasn't sure what it symbolized anymore. Was it gratitude, closure, a transfer of guilt, a symbolic gesture? It felt like all of those things and none of them all at once. I took a deep, steadying breath. "I don't know if I can take the money," I said honestly. "Not because I don't appreciate the gesture, but because it feels too much, too heavy." She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, her expression softening with understanding rather than disappointment. "I knew you might say that," she replied. "And maybe that's all right. The money isn't the important part. What matters is that I brought it, that I tried to return what I felt I owed." A strange calmness washed over her features, as though releasing the secret had untangled knots that had lived in her chest for decades. She exhaled shakily but peacefully. "I thought the money would help me close the chapter," she said. "But I see now that the real closure wasn't in giving, it was in speaking." I nodded slowly. "And I see now that the real gift wasn't the envelope. It was your story." Her lips formed the faintest smile. For the first time since she stepped into my home, she looked unburdened, lighter. There was color in her cheeks again, the slightest glimmer of youthful resilience beneath layers of age and time. "I can leave it here if you want," she said gently, glancing at the envelope. "Or I can take it with me. It doesn't matter whether you accept it. What matters is that I offered it." Her words wrapped around the moment like a soft blanket, closing its edges with tenderness. I felt the tension inside me dissolve into something softer, acceptance perhaps, or understanding. "Take it with you," I said finally, my voice steady. "Let it be yours. You earned it through survival." Her eyes widened slightly, and for a heartbeat she looked startled. Then she slowly nodded, gratitude radiating from her expression in fragile waves. She picked up the envelope with both hands, holding it to her chest like something precious rather than burdensome. The room felt different now, warmer, filled not with tension but with the quiet hum of shared humanity. She stood slowly, using the armrest for balance, and I rose with her. She looked around the room one last time as though trying to memorize it, to carry it with her like a photograph. As she walked toward the door, she paused and turned back, her eyes meeting mine with a depth that sent a shiver through me. "I found my way today," she said softly. "Not to your house, but to myself." And with those words she stepped outside, the sunlight touching her like a blessing. She walked slowly down the path, her shawl fluttering gently in the breeze, and I watched her until she became a small, distant figure turning the corner. When I finally closed the door, I leaned against it, letting the weight of the encounter wash over me. Something inside me felt rearranged, like my heart had discovered a new shape it didn't know it was capable of holding. Compassion felt deeper now. Memory felt sharper. Fate felt less like a force, and more like a gentle hand guiding two strangers toward a moment they both needed. In the end, the emotional twist wasn't just her story. It was realizing how profoundly a single act of kindness can echo through time, shaping lives in ways we never see coming.